The autumn rain drummed against the windows of the modest two-story house in Arlington, Virginia, creating rivulets that distorted the view of the street beyond. Sarah Martinez sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee, staring at the acceptance letter that had arrived 3 days ago. The paper was already worn from constant folding and unfolding, as if somehow the words might change if she looked at them enough times. United States Army Officer Candidate School, the header read in bold official lettering. Below it, her name appeared in crisp type. Sarah Elena Martinez, accepted. The house was eerily quiet, except for the rain and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. Her parents had barely spoken to her since she'd announced her decision to enlist. Her mother, Isabella, moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact and responding to questions with single syllables. Her father, Roberto, had been more direct in his disapproval. 24 years old. Sarah, 24. He had shouted that first night, his face flushed with anger and something else. Fear, perhaps. You have a college degree. You could have any job you want. Why would you throw your life away like this? The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Her parents had immigrated from Mexico 30 years ago, working multiple jobs to give their children opportunities they never had. Her older brother, Miguel, had become a successful lawyer. Her younger sister, Ana, was finishing medical school. And Sarah? Sarah had graduated with honors in international relations from Georgetown, turned down multiple corporate job offers, and instead walked into an army recruiting station. She stood up, abandoning the cold coffee, and walked to the living room where family photos covered nearly every surface. There she was at 5, missing her front teeth, grinning beside Miguel at his high school graduation. At 16, accepting an academic achievement award. At 22, in her cap and gown, flanked by her beaming parents. In every photo, they looked proud. Now that pride had curdled into something bitter and unrecognizable. The front door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air, and her mother, shaking rain from her umbrella. Isabella's eyes briefly met Sarah's before darting away. "Mom, please," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk about this?" Isabella busied herself with removing her rain jacket, hanging it precisely on the coat rack. "There's nothing to talk about, mija. You've made your decision." "But you haven't even asked me why." "Why?" Isabella whirled around, her composure finally cracking. "Why would my daughter, my brilliant daughter who could do anything, choose to... She couldn't finish the sentence, pressing her lips together as tears threatened to spill. "To serve my country?" Sarah finished quietly. "To get herself killed!" Isabella's voice broke. "Do you know what it's like, Sarah? To come to this country with nothing, to build a life, to raise children who could be anything they dream of, only to have one of them choose danger? Choose violence?" Sarah felt her own eyes burning. "It's not about violence, Mom. It's about service. It's about being part of something bigger than myself." "Bigger than your family?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Before Sarah could respond, the garage door rumbled open. Roberto was home from his shift at the hospital where he worked as a radiologic technician. Sarah braced herself. These days, his arrival meant either stony silence or another argument. He entered through the kitchen, his hospital scrubs damp from the rain. His eyes found Sarah immediately, and his jaw tightened. "Still here," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. "Dad, I leave for Fort Benning in 2 weeks. I want us to fix this before..." "Fix this?" Roberto laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to fix this? Then don't go. Simple." "It's not simple." Sarah's frustration boiled over. "Why can't you understand that this is important to me? That this is my calling?" "Calling?" Roberto's voice rose. "Your calling is to waste the education we sacrificed everything for? Your calling is to join an organization that sends young people to die in foreign countries?" "The Army paid for part of that education," Sarah shot back. "ROTC, remember? You were happy enough to accept their money then. That was different. We thought it was just for school. We never imagined you'd actually..." He shook his head, unable to continue. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears, mixing with the steady rhythm of rain against the windows. "You know what hurts the most?" Roberto said finally, his voice quieter now but somehow more devastating. "It's not the danger. It's not even the fear of losing you. It's that you're choosing to leave us. After everything we've done, everything we've built together as a family, you're choosing to walk away." "I'm not walking away from you," Sarah protested, but even as she said it, she could see how it looked from their perspective. "Aren't you?" Isabella interjected, having composed herself enough to speak again. "The Army will become your family now. They tell you where to live, when to eat, who to be. We'll become..." "What? People you visit on holidays?" If you even can? Sarah wanted to argue, to make them understand that joining the army didn't mean she loved them any less, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain the pull she felt? The need to serve? To protect? To be part of the thin line that stood between safety and chaos? How could she make them understand that their sacrifices, their journey to America, their years of hard work, had instilled in her a patriotism so deep it demanded action? I met someone at the grocery store yesterday, Isabella said suddenly, her voice taking on a conversational tone that Sarah knew masked deeper emotions. Mrs. Chen, from the Neighborhood Association. I told her you were home visiting. She asked what you were doing now with your fancy Georgetown degree. Isabella's eyes finally met Sarah's. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't say the words. My daughter, the soldier. I couldn't. The shame in her mother's voice was like a physical blow. Sarah sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. I'm not trying to hurt you, she said softly. Either of you. I love you both more than words can say. But I also love this country. The country that gave you a chance. The country that gave us all a chance. And I want to serve it. Roberto sat down heavily in his recliner, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. Miguel called yesterday, he said, changing the subject, but not really. He wanted to know if it was true, if his sister had really lost her mind. And what did you tell him? The truth. That we don't have a reasonable explanation for any of this. Sarah felt anger flare again. I don't need you to explain me to anyone. I'm not broken. I'm not crazy. I'm making a choice that millions of Americans have made before me. Americans whose parents didn't sacrifice everything to keep them safe, Isabella said quietly. The rain had intensified, beating against the house with renewed vigor. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Sarah wondered if the weather was reflecting the storm in her own life. Do you remember? Roberto said suddenly, his voice distant. When you were 8, you fell off your bike and scraped your knee badly. Blood everywhere. You were so brave, didn't cry at all. Just asked for a bandage so you could get back on the bike. He looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time in days. I was so proud of how tough you were. Now I wonder if I should have been scared instead. Dad, your Uncle Carlos served. You know, he continued, back in Mexico, military police. He used to tell stories when he'd had too much tequila. Stories about what he saw, what he had to do. He was never the same after. Roberto's hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. Is that what you want? To come back different? To come back broken? Or worse, not to come back at all? The U.S. Army isn't the Mexican military from 30 years ago, Sarah said gently. And I'm not Uncle Carlos. No, Roberto agreed. You're my daughter, my little girl who I used to carry on my shoulders, who I taught to ride that bike, who I watched graduate with honors, who I thought would maybe work at the State Department, or the UN, or anywhere that would use that brilliant mind without risking that precious life. The tears Sarah had been holding back finally spilled over. I'm still that person, Dad. Joining the army doesn't change who I am. Doesn't it? Isabella asked. The Sarah I raised wouldn't make a decision that breaks her family's heart. The Sarah you raised, Sarah countered, finding her voice again, stands up for what she believes in. Isn't that what you taught me? To be strong? To be independent? To fight for what's right? We taught you to be smart, Roberto said. To use your advantages, not to throw them away. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm using my education, my skills, my advantages to serve in a way that matters. As an officer, I can make a difference. I can lead. I can protect people. You can die, Isabella interrupted flatly. That's what you can do. You can die in some country whose name we can't even pronounce, for reasons that won't matter to anyone in 10 years. The argument was circular, Sarah realized. They'd had versions of this conversation for 3 days now, and nothing changed. Her parents saw only danger and abandonment. She saw duty and purpose. There seemed to be no bridge between those perspectives. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from her best friend, Melissa. How's the home front? Sarah almost laughed at the military terminology. If only Melissa knew how accurate it was. This did feel like a war zone, complete with casualties, the closeness she'd always shared with her parents chief among them. I should start dinner, Isabella said, standing abruptly. It was her way of ending conversation she couldn't bear to continue. Your sister will be home soon. Anna. Sweet Anna, who was trying desperately to play peacemaker while finishing her surgical rotation. She'd been the only one to congratulate Sarah, quietly, and when their parents weren't around. I think you're brave, she'd whispered. Stupid, maybe, but brave. As Isabella retreated to the kitchen and Roberto turned on the news, another avoidance tactic, Sarah remained on the couch, feeling like a stranger in the home where she'd grown up. The photos on the walls seemed to mock her. All those captured moments of family harmony now feeling like artifacts from a different life. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Fort Benning, with information about what to bring to OCS. The list was extensive and specific, down to the number of white underwear required. Reading it made everything feel more real. In 2 weeks, she'd be there, beginning a journey that would transform her from civilian to soldier, from daughter to officer. The news droned on in the background, Roberto not really watching but needing the noise. Sarah caught fragments, something about military operations overseas, defense budgets, veteran affairs. Her father's jaw tightened with each mention of the military, as if the universe was conspiring to remind him of his daughter's choice. The garage door opened again. Anna was home, earlier than expected. She entered with her usual energy, but it dimmed when she took in the scene. Sarah on the couch, their father rigid in his chair, the sounds of aggressive chopping from the kitchen where their mother was taking out her frustrations on vegetables. "Hey," Anna said carefully, like someone entering a minefield. "How is everyone?" "Fine," came the synchronized response from 3 different rooms, fooling no one. Anna sat beside Sarah, still in her scrubs from the hospital. She smelled like antiseptic and coffee, the familiar scent of long shifts and difficult decisions. Without a word, she took Sarah's hand and squeezed it. "Dr. Patterson asked about you today," Anna said conversationally. "I told him you were joining the Army. He said his son is a captain in the 82nd Airborne. Said it was the best thing that ever happened to him." Roberto's newspaper rustled aggressively. "He also said," Anna continued, her voice carefully neutral, "that military medicine is advancing in incredible ways, that field hospitals are doing revolutionary work in trauma care. Things that save lives on battlefields end up saving lives everywhere." It was a peace offering, Sarah recognized. Anna trying to build a bridge between Sarah's choice and their parents' values. Sarah squeezed her sister's hand in gratitude. "Dinner's ready," Isabella called from the kitchen, her tone suggesting it was an announcement, not an invitation to family togetherness. They gathered around the table. Pozole, Sarah's favorite. Her mother had made her favorite dinner while barely speaking to her. The contradiction was so perfectly representative of the past 3 days that Sarah didn't know whether to laugh or cry. They ate in relative silence, punctuated only by requests to pass dishes and Anna's valiant attempts at normal conversation about her day at the hospital. Sarah pushed the hominy around her bowl, her appetite gone despite the familiar comforting smells. "Mrs. Delgado's son joined the Marines last year," Isabella said suddenly, not looking up from her bowl. "She cries every day, shows everyone his picture in uniform, pretends to be proud, but we all know she cries every day." "Mom," Anna said warningly. "What? I'm just sharing neighborhood news." Isabella's tone was innocently defensive, but her message was clear. "Her son is serving with honor," Sarah said quietly. "She should be proud." "Pride doesn't stop bullets," Roberto muttered. The rest of the meal passed in thick silence. Sarah helped clear the table, moving automatically through the familiar routine of washing and drying dishes with her mother. Their movements were coordinated from years of practice. But the easy chatter that usually accompanied the chore was absent. As Sarah dried the last plate, Isabella spoke without turning from the sink. "Your recruiter called today. Wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed." Her voice was carefully controlled. "I wanted to tell him you'd changed your mind, that my smart, sensible daughter had come to her senses." "But you didn't," Sarah observed. "No, I didn't." Isabella finally turned, and Sarah was struck by how tired she looked. "Because somewhere, deep down where I don't want to look, I know that once you've made up your mind, there's no changing it. Just like your father." It was the closest thing to acceptance Sarah had heard in 3 days, and it made her throat tight with emotion. Later that evening, Sarah found herself in her childhood bedroom, packing items she wouldn't need at OCS into boxes. The room hadn't changed much since high school. Debate trophies on the shelf, academic achievement certificates on the walls, photos with friends at graduation, all evidence of the path her parents had expected her to follow. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Roberto stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable. "Your mother sent me," he admitted. "Said I should talk to you before it's too late." Sarah sat on her bed, making room for him. He sat heavily, the mattress creaking under his weight. "I don't know what to say," he confessed after a moment. "I've been trying to find the words to make you stay, but—" He shrugged helplessly. "I know you're scared," Sarah said gently. "I'm scared too." Roberto looked at her sharply. "Then why?" "Because the things worth doing are often scary," Sarah replied. "You taught me that. When you and Mom came here, weren't you scared? That was different." We were running toward safety, toward opportunity. You're running toward danger. I'm running toward purpose, Sarah corrected. Toward service, toward something that matters. They sat in silence for a moment, the rain still pattering against the window. Will you at least be careful? Roberto asked finally, his voice thick. Will you promise me that? I'll be as careful as the job allows, Sarah said honestly. But Dad, I need you to understand something. This isn't a death wish. This isn't rebellion. This is me trying to give back to the country that gave us everything. This is me trying to be worthy of the sacrifices you and Mom made. Roberto pulled her into a hug then, the first real embrace she'd had from either parent in days. You were always worthy. Mija. Always. That was never in question. When he pulled back, his eyes were wet. I may not understand. I may never understand. But you're my daughter, and I love you. Even when you break my heart. It wasn't acceptance, not really, but it was a start. As Roberto left her room, Sarah returned to her packing. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she'd leave this house, this family, this life she'd always known. She'd trade it for something uncertain and challenging and potentially dangerous, but also something meaningful. She picked up the acceptance letter again, reading the words that had changed everything. Somewhere out there, drill sergeants were preparing to break her down and build her back up. Somewhere, future soldiers were wrestling with their own doubts and family dramas. Somewhere, officers were leading troops in places she couldn't yet imagine. And soon, she'd be part of it all. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the world outside her window washed clean and gleaming under the streetlights. Tomorrow would bring more arguments, more tears, more attempts to change her mind. But tonight, in the quiet of her childhood room, Sarah Martinez allowed herself to imagine the future, not the one her parents had envisioned, but the one she'd chosen for herself. She thought about the oath she would take, the uniform she would wear, the soldiers she might one day lead. She thought about the fear in her parents' eyes and the pride she hoped would one day replace it. She thought about service and sacrifice, and the weight of choosing a path that hurt the people she loved most. And despite it all, she knew she wouldn't change her mind. Because sometimes, the hardest choices were the right ones. Sometimes, serving your country meant disappointing your family. Sometimes, becoming who you were meant to be required breaking the hearts of those who loved you most. Sarah Martinez was going to be an army officer, and somehow, someday, she hoped her parents would understand why. The box of belongings sat sealed and labeled, ready for storage. Her future waited at Fort Benning. And in between, 2 weeks stretched out like a lifetime. 2 weeks to make peace with her choice and help her family make peace with it too, if such a thing was even possible. The Georgia heat hit Sarah like a physical wall as she stepped off the bus at Fort Benning. Even at 0600 hours, the humidity was oppressive, making her civilian clothes stick to her skin within seconds. Around her, other officer candidates emerged from buses, their faces showing the same mixture of determination and apprehension she felt. Move! 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 The voice erupted like thunder, belonging to a staff sergeant whose uniform looked impossibly crisp despite the humidity. Form up! You have 10 seconds to get in formation, and you've already wasted 5. Sarah's body reacted before her mind caught up, muscle memory from ROTC kicking in. She fell into line with the others, shoulders back, eyes forward. The transformation from civilian to soldier had begun. Welcome to Officer Candidate School. Another voice, this one belonging to a captain whose name tape read, Morrison. For the next 12 weeks, you will be tested physically, mentally and emotionally. Some of you will quit. Some of you will fail. Those who remain will earn the privilege of leading America's sons and daughters in the United States Army. Sarah thought of her parents, who had driven her to the airport in silence. Her mother had cried at the gate. Her father had hugged her stiffly, whispering, "Be careful, mija," before walking away without looking back. The memory stung, but she pushed it down. There would be no room for homesickness here. The first 3 weeks were a blur of constant motion and deliberate chaos. Days began at 04:30 with physical training that pushed Sarah's body beyond anything she'd experienced. The ROTC program at Georgetown had been challenging, but this was different. This was designed to break them. Martinez, you call those push-ups? Sergeant First Class Thompson's face was inches from hers as Sarah's arms trembled on repetition 40. My grandmother does better push-ups, and she's been dead for 10 years. Sarah's muscles screamed, but she forced out 5 more repetitions. Around her, other candidates were struggling, some already in the dying cockroach position, on their backs, arms and legs flailing as they tried to recover. Time, Thompson barked. On your feet! 3-mile run! Let's go! As they ran in formation through the pre-dawn darkness, Sarah found herself next to Marcus Williams, a prior service sergeant making the jump to officer. His breathing was controlled, efficient, while Sarah fought for every breath in the thick air. "Control your breathing, Martinez," he advised quietly, keeping his voice low to avoid the instructor's attention. "In through your nose, out through your mouth. This humidity's a killer if you let it be." She nodded gratefully, adjusting her breathing. Marcus had become an unofficial mentor to several candidates, his 5 years of enlisted experience invaluable in navigating the deliberate mind games of OCS. "Why'd you go, officer?" Sarah managed to ask during a brief water break. Marcus's face was serious. "Saw too many bad leaders get good soldiers hurt. Figured I could do better." He paused. "What's your story? You don't have the look of someone running from something." "Running toward," Sarah corrected, thinking of her parents. "Just hope I know what I'm running toward." The academic portion was equally intense. Military history, tactics, leadership principles, ethics. The information came at them like water from a fire hose. Sarah's Georgetown education served her well here, her trained mind absorbing and categorizing information rapidly. But it was the leadership exercises that truly tested them. By week 4, they were taking turns leading squad movements, calling in simulated artillery, making decisions that in real combat would mean life or death. "Candidate Martinez," Captain Morrison's voice cut through the humid afternoon air during a field exercise. "Your squad is pinned down by enemy fire. 2 of your soldiers are wounded. What are your orders?" Sarah's mind raced. She was covered in sweat, dirt, and the red Georgia clay that seemed to get into everything. Her squad, fellow candidates role-playing as her soldiers, waited for her decision. "Johnson, Thompson, lay down, suppressing fire on that hill." She pointed to the enemy position. "Williams, take Rodriguez and flank left through that tree line. Medic up on the wounded. Everyone else, prepare to provide covering fire for the flanking movement on my signal." Morrison watched, his expression unreadable as Sarah coordinated the movement. When the exercise ended, he pulled her aside. "Your tactical decision was sound, Martinez, but you forgot something crucial." He waited, letting her think. "Communication, sir?" she ventured. "Exactly. You never called in your situation to higher command. In real combat, that gets people killed. No one operates in isolation. Remember that." Sarah nodded, filing the lesson away. Every mistake here was a potential life saved in the future. Week 6 brought the peer evaluations, brutal assessments where candidates ranked each other on leadership potential. Sarah sat in the barracks common room, staring at the forms. Around her, alliances and friendships were being tested. "This is bullshit," muttered James Chen, a candidate from California. "We're supposed to be a team, and they're making us tear each other down." "It's not about tearing down," Marcus corrected. "It's about honest assessment. In combat, you need to know who you can rely on." Sarah carefully filled out her evaluations, trying to be fair but honest. When the results came back, she was shocked to find herself ranked 3rd in her platoon. The feedback was illuminating, praised for tactical thinking and academic performance, but noted as sometimes too focused on perfection and needs to better balance compassion with military necessity. That night, she called home for the first time in 3 weeks. The conversation was stilted, her mother's voice distant. "Anna says hello," Isabella offered after exhausting questions about Sarah's health and eating habits. "She's been very busy at the hospital." "How's Dad?" Sarah asked. A pause. "He's adjusting. He put your graduation photo back on the mantle yesterday." It was a small thing, but Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd noticed the photo's absence during her last days at home, another casualty of their conflict. "I have to go, Mom. Lights out soon." "Sarah," her mother's voice cracked slightly. "Just come home safe, okay?" "I will, Mom. I love you." "Te amo también, mija." Week 8 brought the infamous breaking point week, 5 days of continuous operations on minimal sleep, designed to test their limits. Sarah existed in a haze of exhaustion, running on muscle memory and determination. During a nightland navigation exercise, she found herself lost in the Georgia woods with 2 other candidates. Her compass seemed to be malfunctioning, and they'd been wandering for 2 hours. "We're going to fail," one of them, Patterson, said despairingly. "We're going to wash out because of a broken compass." Sarah forced her exhausted mind to focus. She looked up at the stars, barely visible through the tree canopy. "No, we're not." She remembered something her father had taught her during camping trips. The Big Dipper. Find it. Draw a line through the 2 stars at the end of the cup. That's north. Using the stars and terrain features, she led them back to the correct path. They finished the course with minutes to spare, collapsing at the finish point. "Outstanding work, Martinez," the evaluating sergeant said, making notes on his clipboard. "Adaptive thinking under pressure. That's what we're looking for." But the pressure was taking its toll on everyone. By week 9, their original class of 60 was down to 41. Some had quit, unable to handle the physical demands. Others had been dropped for failing academic standards or leadership evaluations. One had been removed for an integrity violation, lying about completing a task. Sarah watched each departure with mixed emotions. Relief that she was still there, sadness for dreams deferred, and a growing understanding of what it truly meant to lead soldiers. The letter from home arrived during week 10. Anna's handwriting, not her mother's. "Sarah, Mom and Dad don't know I'm writing this. Things are tense here. Mom cries when she thinks no one is looking. Dad threw himself into work, taking extra shifts. But yesterday, I caught him reading an article about OCS on his phone. He tried to hide it, but I saw. He's trying to understand, Sarah. They both are. It's just hard for them. Miguel came by last weekend. He said some things, stupid things about you dishonoring the family. Dad threw him out. First time I've ever seen them really fight, so maybe that's progress? I'm proud of you, Hermana. I see soldiers at the hospital sometimes, and I think of you. Stay strong. Anna." Sarah read the letter 3 times, then carefully folded it and placed it in her footlocker. The image of her father defending her to Miguel, even while struggling with her choice himself, gave her strength she didn't know she needed. Week 11 was the final field exercise, a 3-day simulated combat operation where candidates rotated through leadership positions. Sarah found herself designated as platoon leader for the final day, responsible for 40 exhausted, filthy, stressed candidates playing the role of her soldiers. The scenario was complex, a humanitarian mission that turned hostile, requiring quick adaptation and difficult decisions. Sarah coordinated movements, managed resources, dealt with simulated casualties, and made choices that felt impossibly heavy even in training. "Platoon Leader Martinez," Captain Morrison appeared beside her during a brief lull. "Higher command is ordering you to move your platoon through a village suspected of harboring insurgents. ROE is tight. No civilian casualties acceptable. How do you proceed?" Sarah's mind worked through the options, considering force protection, mission accomplishment, and ethical obligations. She outlined a plan that prioritized reconnaissance, established clear sectors of fire, and included contingencies for civilian evacuation. Morrison nodded slowly. "And if you receive fire from a building with known civilians inside?" The question hung in the air. This was the kind of decision that haunted military leaders, the kind that had no perfect answer. "I would attempt to isolate the threat, sir. Establish a cordon, use our interpreter to communicate with civilians, provide clear evacuation routes. If fire continues and threatens my soldiers' lives..." She paused, feeling the weight of theoretical lives in her hands. "I would use the minimum force necessary to eliminate the threat while maximizing civilian protection, and I would live with the consequences of whatever decision I made." Morrison studied her for a long moment. "That's the burden of command. Martinez, the decisions that keep you up at night, make sure you're prepared to carry that weight." The exercise concluded with their platoon successfully completing the mission with minimal simulated casualties. Sarah felt drained, emotionally and physically empty, but she'd done it. They all had. The final week was a whirlwind of administrative tasks, final evaluations, and preparation for graduation. Sarah learned she'd finished 5th in her class of 41, earning the respect of her peers and instructors alike. The night before graduation, she sat with Marcus and a few other candidates on the barrack steps, looking out over Fort Benning. "What's your branch assignment?" Marcus asked. "Military intelligence," Sarah replied. "You?" "Infantry. No surprise there." He smiled. "You did good, Martinez. Came a long way from that first PT test." "We all did," Sarah said, thinking of how much they'd all changed. The soft edges worn away, replaced by something harder but also more flexible. Steel forged in fire.